When Nathan discovered his wife's secret affair, he didn't scream or beg. He vanished, taking everything she cared about with him. By the time Laura realized what he'd done, it was too late. Her money, her lover, her reputation, gone in a single devastating stroke. But Nathan wasn't finished. He wanted her to feel it. All of it. Nathan Cooper kept his hands steady on the steering wheel as the highway stretched ahead, mile after mile of pale concrete and empty billboards. He didn't need music to distract him or a podcast to fill the silence. The quiet suited him. It was the first peace he'd felt in months. By the time the sun had started to rise behind the low hills of Southern California, Nathan had already decided he wasn't coming back. He knew that when Laura woke up in their quiet house and realized he was gone, she'd probably think it was just another fight. Maybe she'd check her phone for his location. Maybe she'd rehearse a few apologies she didn't mean. He almost smiled at the thought. Let her imagine she still had control. Soon enough, she'd understand just how completely he'd severed their life together. Nathan didn't stop driving until he reached the edge of a small desert town, where a rundown motel promised anonymity for cash. He parked, carried a single duffel bag inside, and signed the register under a name he'd never used before. The clerk didn't ask questions. Nobody cared why a man might disappear on a Tuesday morning. That was the beauty of this place. You could vanish and the world kept turning. As he sat on the creaky bed, he thought back over the last 6 months. He could pinpoint the exact night everything began to rot. Laura had said she needed space, that work was stressful, that she needed time alone to think. But Nathan knew her rhythms too well. The late-night texts she'd hidden, the unexplained credit card charges, the sudden need to stay at the office after hours. All the small lies she'd thought he wouldn't piece together. At first, he tried to pretend it was a rough patch. He convinced himself that if he waited, she'd come back to him, that they'd find some way to fix it. But the truth had a way of breaking through, relentless and cold. When he finally confirmed the affair, the last flicker of hope died. Her entire betrayal had been so carefully arranged. Hotel rooms booked under her coworker's name, secret emails, expense reports disguised as business travel. She hadn't just hurt him. She'd built an entire hidden life behind his back. So Nathan built something of his own. Not a confrontation, not a tearful showdown. He'd decided on something simpler and much more final. He would remove himself from the wreckage she'd created, and he'd make sure she understood exactly what she had destroyed. After he checked in, Nathan pulled out the slim leather folder he'd been filling for weeks. Inside were copies of Laura's text messages to Adam, the man she thought was worth throwing everything away for. There were credit card statements, time-stamped photos, and evidence of how they'd used company funds for their little escapes. He'd printed it all, meticulously organized. Every page a piece of the truth she believed she could bury. In a few hours, the HR department at her office would receive an anonymous package. So would Adam's wife, Michelle. And by the time Laura tried to call him, her calls would go unanswered. She would have no idea where he'd gone. She wouldn't even be able to check the bank accounts. Nathan had moved their joint savings into a separate account in his name, leaving only enough for her to survive a few weeks. No more shopping sprees, no more late-night dinners on his dime. He knew how this would play out. Laura would wake up late, maybe smiling at some memory she thought was special. She'd reach for her phone and see nothing from Nathan. She'd try to pay for something and realize her cards were frozen. She'd call Adam for reassurance. But Adam had no idea what was coming either. By the time the workday ended, both of them would be scrambling to cover their tracks, to explain the evidence neither could deny. Nathan lay back on the thin mattress and closed his eyes, not because he was tired, but because he felt, finally, calm. All the shouting he'd imagined, all the dramatic scenes, none of it had happened. He hadn't needed to scream. He hadn't needed to break things. He'd simply removed himself and left the truth to do the rest. He woke hours later to the sound of his phone buzzing against the nightstand. One text, then another, then 5 more. He didn't read them yet. He just watched the screen light up over and over, each notification a confirmation that his plan was working exactly as he intended. Nathan knew he could have walked away quietly, He could have left the house, the money, the marriage without looking back. But he also knew Laura would have never learned anything from that. She would have blamed him, spun a story about how he'd been cold or inattentive or unwilling to try. No, she needed to feel it. She needed to understand that trust wasn't something you could set aside for a fling and expect to pick back up when the novelty wore off. As dawn painted the motel walls in pale light, Nathan finally picked up his phone and scrolled through the messages. Laura's first text was almost casual. "Hey, did you move some money around?" By the last, her tone was different. "Nathan, what are you doing? Please answer me. I don't understand." He set the phone down again. She didn't need an answer yet. Let her wonder. Let her feel the uncertainty. The world she thought she controlled was about to collapse piece by piece. Nathan closed his eyes and let the quiet fill him again. He hadn't won. There were no winners here. But he was done being the fool everyone expected to forgive and forget. Tomorrow, he'd begin the rest of his life. Without Laura, without the lies, without the weight of her choices crushing him. Tomorrow, she'd wake up to find everything she valued gone. And that was only the beginning. When the morning settled in fully, Nathan sat on the edge of the motel bed and watched the phone screen fill with new messages. Each one carried more urgency. Laura's tone shifted from polite confusion to open fear in less than an hour. "Nathan, answer me. I'm serious. The account is empty. What did you do? Call me. We can talk about this." Nathan didn't respond. He powered the phone off again, set it aside, and stood. Today wasn't about her. Today was about ensuring the last illusions she clung to would break in a way she could never deny. He checked the time, then picked up the folder he'd prepared for Adam's company. Each document inside was numbered, labeled, and cross-referenced: texts, emails, travel records, receipts. Not only did it prove the affair, but it also showed misuse of company money. Nathan had spent weeks assembling the proof, double-checking every detail. He hadn't rushed this part. If he did it right, neither of them could slip free on a technicality. He left the motel before most of the staff were awake and drove the 30 miles back into Orange County. The corporate campus where Laura and Adam worked sprawled across several blocks, glass buildings reflecting the rising sun. Nathan parked down the street and waited, letting the tension in his chest fade. He wasn't here to confront anyone. He just needed to deliver the evidence. Once the office mailroom opened, he carried the large brown envelope inside and left it with the clerk, giving only Adam's name and department. The woman behind the counter thanked him without glancing up. She had no idea she'd just accepted something that would crack open a hidden life. He walked out feeling lighter. No drama, no scenes, just facts that would speak for themselves. Nathan drove away, but he didn't return to the motel yet. He stopped in a small parking lot behind a coffee shop, powered his phone back on, and watched as messages poured in. Laura's latest text was nearly a full paragraph. She was terrified. "I tried to pay our mortgage. They said the accounts were closed. You can't just take everything. What are you trying to prove?" He read it without any emotion. She still believed this was about punishing her financially, as if money was the core of their problem. She didn't understand this was about honesty and consequences. When you lie, when you dismantle trust piece by piece, you don't get to keep the life built on it. He set the phone aside and opened a second envelope addressed to Michelle Harper. He debated whether to involve her, whether she deserved to have her life uprooted because of Adam's choices. In the end, he decided she deserved the truth. No one should live in ignorance, believing in a marriage that had already rotted through. The email he drafted to her was direct and plain. "Hi, Michelle. You don't know me, but you deserve to know the truth. Your husband Adam has been having an affair with my wife, Laura, for over 6 months. I've attached proof. I'm sorry you have to find out this way." Nathan attached every file, screenshots of affectionate texts, records of hotel stays, expense reports. He paused before hitting send. He thought of Michelle waking up to this, the betrayal she'd have to process. But in the end, he clicked send anyway. It wasn't his job to protect her from reality. After he sent the email, he drove back to the motel and waited. This was the part he'd anticipated the most, watching the fallout. He knew it wouldn't take long. The evidence was thorough enough that Adam couldn't talk his way out of it, not with company funds involved and a spouse who had every reason to expose him. At noon, Nathan's phone lit up with the first call from an unknown number. He let it ring until voicemail picked up. A moment later, another came in, same number, same persistence. He finally answered, keeping his voice calm. Hello. He didn't need to ask who it was. Adam's voice was already cracking under the strain. You think this is funny, you piece of... Nathan didn't interrupt. He let Adam rant, listing all the ways he'd ruined his life. How Michelle had thrown him out. How HR was investigating him. How nothing he'd said could fix it. Nathan waited until Adam finally ran out of air. You're done? He asked quietly. You don't get it, Adam snapped. This was nothing. It wasn't serious. She meant nothing to me. Hearing it said out loud confirmed everything Nathan suspected. For Adam, Laura was just a side project, a cheap distraction, but Laura had risked everything for it. Her marriage, her home, her reputation. You should probably tell her that, Nathan said flatly. She seems to think you were soulmates. Fix this, Adam demanded. Tell my wife it was a misunderstanding. Nathan almost laughed. Not my problem. Before Adam could spit out another threat, Nathan hung up and blocked his number. That was one thread cut. He turned his phone back to Laura's messages. They were unraveling now. No more measured questions, no more attempts to keep up appearances. Nathan, please, just talk to me. Adam's not answering me. Did you do something? I'm begging you. Please. He let them sit unread for a while longer. She needed to feel this, every second of uncertainty, every ripple of panic. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. For once, she had to face exactly what she'd chosen. The afternoon sun stretched shadows across the parking lot. Nathan stayed in his car and watched people come and go, ordinary lives moving on. He thought about all the plans he and Laura had once made. Trips they never took, conversations they never finished. He thought about the man he'd been when they first met. Someone who believed her promises. Someone who thought love could survive any betrayal if you tried hard enough. He wasn't that man anymore. When his phone buzzed again, Nathan finally answered. Laura's voice cracked the moment she heard him breathe. Nathan, I don't know what you did, but... He cut her off gently. You don't need to know everything. Not yet. Her voice wavered. You can't just disappear. We're married. We were, he corrected softly. She went silent, as if she hadn't truly believed he would walk away. Then, in a voice that sounded small, she whispered, Can we please just talk in person? Nathan stared through the windshield at the fading sky. For a moment, he felt almost sorry for her. Almost. But he'd promised himself he wouldn't let pity pull him back into the mess she created. Soon, he said, but not today. He ended the call, powered the phone off and leaned back in the seat. Let her wonder where he was. Let her feel the emptiness she'd tried to fill with someone else. Tomorrow she'd understand just how final this was. And tomorrow he'd be ready for the next step. By the next morning, the storm Nathan had set in motion was fully alive. He woke early in the motel, powered on his phone, and watched the notifications roll in. There were dozens. Missed calls from Laura, new texts from unknown numbers, one voicemail after another. He listened to a few seconds of each. Laura's voice was raw with panic. She demanded to know why the mortgage company had called her, why her work phone was blowing up, why Adam had gone silent. She didn't realize yet that she was only seeing the first signs of collapse. Nathan let her sit in that confusion a little longer. He knew she would call Adam for reassurance, hoping he'd explain everything away, but Adam was too busy trying to save himself. The evidence Nathan had given HR wasn't something that could be spun as harmless. The company's policy on employee relationships was explicit, especially when expense accounts were involved. By mid-morning, the call he'd been expecting finally came. An unknown number flashed across the screen. Nathan considered ignoring it but answered instead. Adam's voice burst through the line before he could say a word. You self-righteous piece of garbage. You think you're clever? Adam's breathing was ragged, his words tumbling over each other. I don't know what you sent my wife, but she's locked me out of the house. My job, HR is demanding I come in and explain myself. Nathan stayed silent, letting Adam's rage spill out unchecked. You happy? Adam shouted. You destroyed everything over some stupid fling. That's what this was. It wasn't serious. Nathan finally spoke, his voice measured. Not serious? Then why did you spend half a year hiding it? Adam let out a humorless laugh. Because it was convenient. She was convenient. But you, this, he trailed off, like he couldn't find the words to express how badly things had gone off the rails. I don't care what it was to you, Nathan said quietly. You deserve to deal with it. You think you're better than me? Adam snapped. You think this makes you some noble hero? No, Nathan said. It just makes me done. Before Adam could reply, Nathan ended the call. He set the phone on the table and looked out the small motel window. A delivery truck pulled into the lot. A woman carried a bag of groceries to her car. Everyone else's life looked ordinary, untouched by this chaos. He almost envied them. He didn't have much time to reflect. Minutes later, a notification appeared. An email from Michelle Harper. He opened it and read her single sentence. Thank you for telling me. He's out of my life for good. Nathan closed the message and exhaled slowly. One part of the wreckage complete. Adam had lost the marriage he'd risked so casually. Now, it was only a matter of time before he lost his job. His phone buzzed again, Laura this time. The texts were frantic, sentences blending together without punctuation. Nathan, please, you have to answer me. I don't know what you did. Adam isn't talking to me. My boss said they need to see me in person. I'm scared. I don't know how to fix this. Please call me. I'm begging you. He didn't answer. Not yet. He wanted her to sit in that fear, to feel the reality she'd created by choosing Adam over honesty. Late that afternoon, his phone lit up with a video call request. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of him. He accepted, and Michelle's face appeared on the screen. She looked composed, her voice steady. I thought you'd want to know, she began. Adam tried to come home this morning. I told him it was over. He said he'd blame you for all of it. Nathan didn't react. He can blame me if it helps him sleep. Doesn't change anything, she agreed. A small pause. I called his boss too. Made sure they knew I'd cooperate with HR. He's about to find out how serious this is. Nathan inclined his head. Thank you. You don't have to thank me, she said quietly. I'm just cleaning up my own life. There was a brief silence. Neither of them seemed to know what to say next. Then Michelle spoke again, her voice lower. I'm sorry you had to be the one to pull the trigger. Someone had to, Nathan replied. Better now than another year pretending everything was fine. She nodded once and ended the call. He set the phone aside, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The pieces were all moving exactly as he'd planned. Adam was exposed. Michelle was free. And Laura, she was finally alone. He turned the phone back on and scrolled through the latest messages. Laura's tone had shifted again. No more demands. Just desperation. Nathan, please. I'm scared. Can you just tell me what's happening? Nathan, I know you're angry. I don't blame you. I'll do anything to fix this. Her words had lost the edge of self-importance. She finally sounded like someone who understood she'd gone too far to take it back. He waited an hour before he called her. When she answered, her voice was thin, cracking with emotion. Nathan. Morning, Laura. His tone was calm, almost polite. Don't morning me, she snapped, her voice shaking. My accounts are locked. Adam's not returning my calls. My boss wants a meeting with HR. What did you do? Nathan let a few seconds pass. I showed people the truth. She swallowed audibly. This isn't the way. You can't just blow up everything. He tilted his head, though she couldn't see him. That's exactly what you did. Her voice broke. I'm sorry. I am. But you're destroying me. I know. Nathan, please. I don't have anywhere to go. That's not my problem. Her breath came out ragged. I loved you. I still love you. He didn't raise his voice. You loved yourself. A long silence fell between them. When she finally spoke, she sounded like she was running out of words. What now? Now, he said quietly. You figure it out without me. Before she could answer, he ended the call. He blocked her number and set the phone face down. Outside, the day was ending. For the first time in months, he felt like the future was finally open, unshackled by her choices. Laura would wake up tomorrow to a life she didn't recognize, and she would have to rebuild it alone. He hadn't screamed or threatened or begged her to stay. He hadn't needed to. The truth had been enough, and it was only just beginning. The next day began before sunrise. Nathan was already awake, sitting at the small table in the motel room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He didn't feel tired. The adrenaline had burned away whatever exhaustion he might have carried. By now, the evidence he'd sent to HR would have been reviewed in detail. Adam's expense reports, the hotel invoices, the explicit messages. None of it could be dismissed as gossip. As soon as the office opened, there would be meetings behind closed doors, decisions being made. Nathan checked his phone. Dozens of messages blinked on the screen. Laura hadn't stopped trying to reach him. Some of the texts were rambling apologies. Others edged into anger and blame. He knew she was still trying to convince herself this was a fight she could fix. She couldn't see that this was final. He scrolled past them and saw a new notification. A voice message from Michelle. He pressed play and listened to her measured words. Just so you know, Adam was terminated this morning. Misuse of company funds. Violation of conduct policy. He showed up here trying to talk to me. I told him to leave. He's staying with a friend, apparently. I thought you'd want to know. Nathan didn't reply. He closed the message and slipped the phone into his pocket. Adam's professional life was over. Michelle had already filed divorce paperwork. Whatever future Adam had imagined with Laura no longer existed. Late that morning, he finally turned his phone back on to hear Laura's voice. She called before he could block the number again. Nathan, please don't hang up, she blurted. I'm listening, he said. Her voice cracked. I know you hate me, but you've made your point. You've taken everything. The money, the house, I can't even pay my bills. And now Adam, you mean the man you threw your marriage away for? Nathan asked. He told me it wasn't serious, she whispered. He almost felt sorry for her in that moment. Almost. But then he remembered every lie, every time she'd looked him in the eye and pretended nothing was wrong. That's what happens when you build your life on deceit, he said. She drew in a shaky breath. I get it. I deserve this. But please, can we just talk? In person. One time. He waited a few seconds before replying. Fine. Really? 1 hour. At the house. Nathan ended the call without waiting for her response. He didn't want to hear another apology she didn't mean. He packed his few belongings, checked out of the motel, and drove back toward the neighborhood he hadn't seen in days. The streets looked the same. Families out walking dogs, sprinklers running in neat front yards. But the house itself felt different the moment he saw it. It wasn't home anymore. It was just another place where he'd been lied to. He parked down the street and waited. When Laura's car pulled in, she sat behind the wheel for several minutes before she finally climbed out. She walked up to the porch with her shoulders slumped. She looked at the door as if she was afraid to see what waited on the other side. Nathan stepped out of his car and approached. When she saw him, her expression crumpled with relief and dread all at once. Nathan, she started, her voice low. He didn't move to let her inside. This isn't a negotiation. I'm not here to fight, she said quickly. I just need you to hear me. Then talk. She swallowed. I don't know what to say that matters. I thought I needed something different. I thought Adam cared about me, but he was lying to me too. He didn't respond. She kept going, as if the words were all she had left. I know I destroyed everything. I know I can't fix it. But when you disappeared, when you cut me off, I realized how much I took for granted. You, our life, everything. Nathan looked at her without any feeling. You realized too late. Tears welled in her eyes, but he didn't let himself care. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "We can start over. We can." "No," he interrupted, his voice steady. "We can't." Her breath hitched. "You're not even going to try? I spent 6 months trying, while you spent 6 months sneaking around behind my back." She gripped her hands together as if trying to hold herself up. "I don't have anywhere else to go. That's not my responsibility anymore." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He held it out to her. She didn't take it. "What is that?" she asked. "Your divorce papers." A small, strangled sound escaped her throat. "No, Nathan, please. We can figure this out. Just give me time." "There is nothing left to figure out." He set the envelope down on the porch step. When he looked up, she was staring at him, her face pale. "You think this makes you better than me?" she said, her voice raw. "No," he said calmly. "Just free." She pressed her lips together as if trying to hold back a sob. "I don't have anyone else." "You chose that," Nathan said simply. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was final in a way no argument could ever be. He turned to leave, but then he stopped and looked back one last time. "Oh, and the house?" he added. "I've already signed it over to a realtor. It goes on the market next week." Her eyes widened. "You can't do that. It was never in your name." She reached for him, but he stepped back out of reach. "Nathan!" He shook his head once. "Goodbye, Laura." He walked down the driveway without looking back. He didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. He felt clean, as if he'd finally set down something heavy he'd carried too long. Behind him, Laura sank to the porch step, clutching the envelope, her shoulders shaking. Nathan climbed into his car, started the engine, and pulled away from the house that no longer belonged to either of them. He didn't know where he was going yet. He only knew it would be somewhere she'd never follow. And that was enough. Nathan didn't slow down as he drove away. The neighborhood blurred past him, every familiar landmark reduced to something he felt no connection to anymore. The grocery store where they used to shop together. The diner they'd gone to after long days. It was all just scenery now, belonging to another life. He had no destination in mind, only a direction. East, away from the coast, away from the routines he'd built with Laura. As he merged onto the highway, he realized for the first time that he wasn't thinking about what she was doing or how she was feeling. He wasn't imagining her calling him again or wondering how to make her understand. That part of him, the man who still hoped she'd feel remorse and try to repair everything, was gone. Nathan stopped at a gas station 2 hours later. He filled up the car and stepped inside to pay with cash. The attendant didn't look twice at him, just handed him the change and thanked him. He carried his receipt back to the car and sat in the driver's seat, feeling a small relief in how ordinary it all was. No one here knew his story. No one cared. He liked that. He pulled out his phone, half expecting to see more messages, but there were none. Laura had finally stopped calling. Maybe she'd realized there was nothing left to say. Maybe she'd accepted that the life she'd counted on was over. He didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel regret. What he felt was clarity, a quiet understanding that sometimes the only way to survive betrayal was to end everything it touched. He thought about Michelle. He imagined her in her own house, packing Adam's things into boxes, deciding what her next step would be. She hadn't deserved any of this, and he was sorry she'd been forced to confront it. But he also knew she was stronger than Adam had ever imagined. She'd rebuild her life. She'd find her own version of freedom. As for Adam, Nathan had no interest in what happened to him next. He'd already lost his job, his marriage, and the safety net he'd hidden behind. Whether he blamed Nathan or Laura didn't matter. He had chosen the affair, believing he'd never be held accountable. Now he was discovering what it meant to burn everything down around him. Late that afternoon, Nathan pulled into a small roadside motel. It wasn't much different from the one he'd left that morning, just another temporary place to rest. He paid in cash, carried his bag inside, and set his phone on the dresser without turning it back on. He didn't want to hear anything else. For the first time in months, the silence felt clean. He sat on the edge of the bed and replayed the last conversation with Laura in his mind. She'd sounded so certain that her tears would sway him, that her regret would undo what she'd done. She hadn't understood that trust wasn't something you could recover by pleading. It was something you either protected or destroyed. She had destroyed it. He'd only revealed the truth to everyone else. He thought about the years they'd spent together, the promises they'd made, and the quiet ways she'd started to drift from him long before she ever confessed she felt unfulfilled. He wondered if she'd ever admit to herself that Adam wasn't some grand passion. He was just an excuse to escape her own dissatisfaction. Nathan suspected she'd spend a long time blaming him, blaming Adam, blaming circumstances before she ever looked in the mirror and accepted responsibility. But that was her journey to make. He no longer felt any need to be part of it. The next morning, Nathan woke before sunrise. He packed up his few belongings, checked out, and drove east again. He didn't have a final destination, but he had an idea. Somewhere smaller, quieter. A place where no one would know what he'd been through. He had enough savings to start fresh. He didn't feel like a man who'd lost everything. He felt like someone who had finally stopped living in a lie. He stopped at a cafe an hour later, ordered breakfast, and sat near the window. He watched other people come and go, parents with small kids, older couples reading newspapers, college students studying. All of them moving through their lives unaware of the upheaval he'd left behind. Comforted him. It reminded him that the world didn't end just because one marriage did. As he sipped his coffee, he thought about what he'd learned. Some betrayals couldn't be fixed. Some apologies came too late to matter. And some lines, once crossed, meant there was no going back. He knew that if he'd stayed, if he'd accepted her pleas, he would have been granting permission for her to do it again someday. He would have been telling her that everything she'd done was forgivable simply because she was afraid to be alone. He wouldn't live that way. Before he left the cafe, Nathan powered on his phone one final time. There were no new messages, no missed calls. The silence was confirmation that the story was over. He'd done what he needed to do. He'd told the truth. He'd walked away. He deleted Laura's number, then Adam's, then Michelle's. He didn't want reminders. They were part of another chapter, one he had no reason to revisit. Outside, the day was bright. He walked back to his car, unlocked the door, and set his bag in the passenger seat. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he felt the last weight slip from his chest. There would be no return, no reunion, no moment when he'd wonder if he'd done too much. He had simply refused to let deceit define the rest of his life. And that, he realized, was the real ending. Not the divorce papers, not the frozen accounts or the evidence he'd delivered. The ending was the decision to value himself enough to leave, even when it would have been easier to stay. The ending was learning that the truth, however painful, was the only ground worth standing on. He didn't look back as he drove away. He wouldn't look back again.